All right, everyone ready to dive in? Today, we're tackling Spiro Agnew.
Oh, yeah, he's a fascinating figure.
Definitely, I mean, most people know him from Watergate, but like his story starts way before that.
Oh, way before.
Yeah, in like the rough and tumble world of Baltimore politics.
That's a whole different world back then.
Totally. So we're going to be looking at the early part of his career,
Okay.
using the first episode of the American Scandal podcast right as our guide.
Excellent source.
Yeah, so get this Agnew right. He rises to power in a system that had its own set of rules.
Definitely not always the ones written down.
Exactly. Think of it like, I don't know, like a political chess match, you know?
I like that.
Where ambition and favors, those were your pieces.
It's amazing how much Agnew's early life, foreshadowed his political style.
Yeah.
Yeah. So imagine this.
Yeah.
Son of Greek immigrants, family restaurant, gets wiped out during the Depression.
Tough start.
Right. Then he serves in World War II, comes back to Baltimore,
Okay.
law degree in hand, ready to take on the world, but he hits a wall. Struggles to break into, the super competitive legal field.
It's almost like a classic underdog story, isn't it?
Kinda, yeah. So instead of, fancy courtrooms and high-profile cases, he ends up working as a personnel manager.
At a grocery store, of all places.
Right. And that's where we get this, really interesting glimpse into his personality.
Oh, tell me more.
So the podcast tells the story about him catching a shoplifter.
Oh. Okay.
But he doesn't just, call the cops.
What does he do?
He uses his understanding of, human nature to get the guy to not only confess,
No way.
but to return the stolen goods, too.
Wow. That's pretty slick. I mean, it shows like a strategic mind, right?
Totally. And a strong sense of justice.
Well, his version of it, anyway. Makes you wonder if that experience planted a seed.
What do you mean?
Like this idea that rules could be, bent or maybe even broken.
Interesting thought. To achieve a desired outcome.
Exactly.
And you have to remember, this is Baltimore in the 50s and 60s. A time of major change. Social upheaval.
Yeah, the city was a Democratic stronghold, right?
Absolutely. And the old ways of doing things were being challenged left and right.
Then comes Lester Barrett.
Oh, yeah. Agnew's friend and mentor.
Yeah.
This is where things take a turn.
So Barrett sees Agnew's ambition, his frustration too, probably.
Yeah. And he gives him this bold piece of advice.
Let me guess. Run for office.
Bolder, switch parties, become a Republican.
Whoa. That's a huge leap, especially back then.
Right, but Barrett believed the Republicans were, desperate for strong candidates.
Okay.
And Agnew, with his charisma and, his sharp mind, he fit the bill.
So it shows that Agnew was willing to, make unconventional moves.
To say the least.
Right. To challenge the status quo, to advance his career.
Exactly. And that's what he does. He jumps into politics, lands a spot on the zoning board.
Zoning board. Sounds kind of boring.
Yeah, you'd think so, but in Baltimore, it was a position of real influence, a taste of power.
I see. And this is where he starts making friends and enemies.
Right. He gains this reputation for fairness. But the Democrats, they see him as a threat.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. They use their majority on the county council to kick him off the board.
Classic power play.
Absolutely. Trying to put him back in his place.
But Agnew doesn't back down.
Not a chance. He turns the hearing into this public spectacle.
Oh, I bet.
Rallies his supporters.
Yeah.
Accuses the Democrats of being corrupt and power hungry.
Smart move.
Right. He taps into the anxieties of the time, the fear of communism.
Really?
Yeah. Even compares the Democrats' actions to, get this, Castro.
Wow. That's a bold comparison.
Might sound over the top, but it worked.
I bet it did.
He presents himself as a victim of the Democratic machine, and it resonated with voters.
So he basically turns this setback into a launch pad.
Exactly. He becomes this Republican folk hero, the outsider who stood up to the establishment.
It's almost Shakespearean.
Totally. And this newfound popularity gives him the momentum he needs to make an even bolder move, running for county executive.
The top dog in the county.
And a position that hadn't been held by a Republican in decades.
Talk about high stakes.
Right. But here's the kicker. He wins.
No way.
He pulls off this incredible upset, defeating the incumbent Democrat, Mike Birmingham.
Wow. Talk about a turning point.
It is. It's no longer zoning boards or local disputes.
He's running the show now.
Exactly. He's responsible for governing a complex and rapidly changing region.
So Agnew, this Republican outsider, right? He's finally in charge.
It's 1967. He's standing on those courthouse steps, taking the oath.
Baltimore County executive. Big win.
Huge. But now the real work starts. governing.
Right. And like we were saying before, Baltimore County, it had its own way of doing things.
The podcast does a great job of contrasting Agnew's campaign promises with the reality of being in power.
Yeah, like he ran on this platform of change, right?
Yeah.
Cleaning up the system.
Exactly. But then he steps into office and finds this deep-rooted culture of, favors and patronage.
It's like the podcast even uses this term walk around money.
It was basically a euphemism for bribes and kickbacks.
Wow. Like an unspoken rule, like the price of doing business with the county.
Pretty much. And it wasn't just small-time players either. The podcast uses this engineer, Lester Matz, as an example.
Okay.
He's having trouble getting county contracts for his construction firm.
So what does he do?
He decides to donate to Agnew's campaign, hoping to get a leg up.
Makes sense. I mean, that's politics, right?
Sure. But then it gets interesting. Matz gets a call from Walter Jones,
Who's that?
one of Agnew's close friends.
Yeah.
Also his designated collector.
Oh, okay. So this is where things get shady.
Yeah. Jones is very direct. Tells Matz if he wants those contracts, he's going to have to kick back 5% of their value.
Whoa. Straight up like that.
No beating around the bush.
I bet Matz was shocked.
He was at first, even disgusted by it, according to the podcast.
But I'm guessing he came around.
Well, he realizes that if he doesn't play the game, he's going to lose out on those lucrative contracts.
It's like a moral dilemma, right? Principles versus profit.
It is. And that's the insidious thing about this kind of system.
How so?
It creates this feeling like it's inevitable, like everyone's doing it. So you have to as well.
I can see that. So where does that leave Agnew?
That's the big question, right? Was he a product of this corrupt system? Or did he actively keep it going?
It's hard to say.
Yeah. Did he go in wanting to change things but get seduced by the power?
It's tough. I mean, it really makes you think about how much our environment shapes our behavior.
Absolutely. If everyone around you is doing something, even if it's wrong, it becomes easier to justify your own actions.
So this whole experience in Baltimore with the walk-around money and the favors, it must have had a big impact on Agnew.
Oh, for sure. It laid the groundwork for how he would operate later on a much bigger stage.
So Baltimore was like his training ground for national politics.
In a way, yeah. And that's where things get really interesting, because after Baltimore County, Agnew sets his sights on the governor's mansion.
From zoning disputes to the vice presidency, it's kind of a crazy trajectory.
It really is. And I think it shows just how far ambition, and playing the game can take you.
Yeah, even if the games get some, well, questionable rules.
Makes you think, right? Like, did all that wheeling and dealing in Baltimore, did it sort of prepare him for national politics?
Almost like what do they call it? A trial by fire?
Yeah, something like that. Did it make him more, I don't know, more pragmatic?
Or maybe more cynical about how power really works.
Right.
That's the thing with Agnew. It's like we're trying to untangle this web,
It's a complicated story for sure.
Tracing his actions, his decisions, all the way back to, like, the beginning.
And the podcast really does a good job of showing those contradictions in his personality.
Oh, totally. He could be charming, charismatic.
But then, bam, ruthless and vindictive.
He's like almost two different people.
Or maybe two sides of the same coin.
Maybe. It's what makes his story so interesting, I think.
It really is. Agnew's story isn't just about him, though.
True. It's a reflection of a whole era in American politics.
Definitely. The mid-20th century, all that change, social upheaval,
Yeah. So it's not just a biography. It's like social commentary almost.
Exactly. Helps us understand that particular moment in history.
And it's amazing how relevant it still feels.
Right. I mean, ambition, power, what people will do to get ahead, those are timeless themes.
It makes you wonder, like, how much has really changed?
But that's a good question.
Are those systems of power, are they any less open to manipulation or corruption?
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about.
I think Agnew's story, it's kind of a warning.
How so?
It shows that even the people at the very top, they're not immune to the allure of power.
Or the temptation to, well, maybe bend the rules a bit.
Exactly. And that's why accountability, transparency, it's so important.
Absolutely. The more we understand how these systems work, the better.
Right. The better we can hold our leaders accountable, make sure they're acting ethically.
I think that's a key takeaway here.
Yeah, this wasn't just about Agnew's life, but about thinking critically about those systems of power.
And how they affect us all.
Right. So, big question. Was Agnew a villain? or a victim of his circumstances.
I think it's more complicated than that.
I agree.
He was a complex guy,
Yeah.
a product of his time for sure.
He made choices that got him to the top, but also led to his downfall.
That's the tragedy of it, isn't it?
Well, I think we've done a pretty good job of unpacking Agnew's story, don't you think? From Baltimore County to, well, almost the White House.
We covered a lot of ground,
Mm.
but there's always more to learn, to explore.
For sure. So if you're interested in digging deeper into this fascinating and often kind of troubling period in American history, I definitely recommend checking out the whole season of American Scandal.
It's a great resource. Agnew's story, even though it's rooted in a specific time, it teaches us valuable lessons about ambition, power, and those choices we make when faced with temptation.
And those lessons, they still resonate today, just as much as they did back then.
Absolutely.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the world of Spiro Agnew. Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
And until next time, keep those brains buzzing.